Hey everybody, it's Sean here bringing you another how-to video. Today I've got an exciting one. We're tackling a set of RevLimiter.net gauges, or gauge faces I should say, on a 2016 and newer Mazda MX-5 Miata. We'll be working on my 2020 MX-5 RF in the Grand Touring trim. So I've got an ND2, but this should be approximately the same process for an ND1 or an ND3 as well. So let's take a look at what we've got here. So Adam Wolf is the one I worked with over at RevLimiter.net who designed these gauges. These are a custom set of gauges. I'm sure Adam would love to sell you a similar set, but he did put some design time in getting these for me. I've got a Ferrari-esque looking style here that I decided to go with, and I could not be happier with just looking at them, the end result here, as you can see. And really cool to see the goodies that came with this. He threw in a small 164 Hot Wheels, a ton of stickers, a cool business card, by the way. That's probably the most unique business card I've ever seen. And stickers, a handwritten thank you message, and plenty of instructions to come along and help you out through the process. So really excited to get this one going. Let's take a look at what we need to help this process on our own. So I've got a 10mm socket on a small 1/4-inch ratchet, some super glue of your choice. I've got a small flathead screwdriver, or you could use a pry tool, something to get one little pop rivet out. And then I've got a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver, a JIS or Japanese Industrial Standard screwdriver would be even better if you have one. And then here's a little package of things that come with the gauge set from Adam. And you can see there's a couple spacers, there's a set of gloves, a small pry tool, and some cleaning materials in there. And if you do happen to get some dust on the gauges, according to Adam's directions here, some blue masking tape or painter's tape could help to get any dust off. And then again, we've got the packing list itself and some detailed instructions. There is a link there to a website where you can go to see very solid how-to instructions along with some videos even. And then of course I've got some extra shop towels or paper towels if needed. So that's what we've got. Now we can go on the interior and start to disassemble part of the interior just to give us access to the gauges. All right, so the first step in the process is to remove the negative battery cable from the battery. So we're going to use our 10mm socket to loosen up this nut. Once you have it loose, you don't need to completely remove the nut, just loosen it, and then you can pull the negative battery cable away and set it aside. Okay, to access the gauges, the first step is going to be removing this big plastic kick panel. We're on the passenger side. Yes, that's right, passenger side. We're going to pull up this kick panel by simply prying on the edges, and you can hear those tabs will break free. We'll simply pry up to completely remove that kick panel down there. Okay, now that that plastic panel has been removed, we're actually going to remove this lower panel here. And there's one pop rivet way in the back. That's where you use that small flathead screwdriver. Maybe you can use your nail and dig under there just to get the center to pop out. Then that whole piece should easily remove from the passenger footwell. Okay, next we're going to peel up the rest of this trim to get it out of the way. Please note which side is up and which goes where. It's kind of got a pre-curve to it, so you should be able to keep that straight. Now we have access to the A-pillar, and to remove the A-pillar, there's essentially 2 clips that hold it in place, about right there and there, and we're going to pull those directly away from how it's mounted now, and we're also going to come in an upward motion because there's some guides at the base that we're going to be pulling those out of. Now that we've got the A-pillar removed, make sure you access that clip, disconnect that clip to the factory tweeter, and then you can remove the panel from the car. One thing to note is instead of unplugging the tweeter, you can also simply remove the entire tweeter simply by prying upward on the base there. Might actually be easier, as I did have a tough time getting that tweeter harness disconnected. Okay, next we're going to remove this entire under panel here. And to start that process, we're going to remove this 10mm bolt. After that, we're simply going to pry from the top straight towards us. You have to be a little careful here on the left-hand side, but again, just pull straight towards you. Be gentle, but use enough force and you should break those tabs loose that are behind that panel. Okay, now that that panel is removed, we can move on to this center trim panel around our hazard flasher and air vent. So what we're going to do now is, starting from the left-hand side, we're going to carefully pry this piece up. There are some tabs, and there is electrical connection, of course, with the hazard button. So make sure you're not just yanking that completely off, but we're going to simply pry from the left-hand side. The right side will act as a hinge, and then we are going to disconnect the hazard button connector on the backhand side. Should be pretty easy to remove that one. Just so you know, that's where that connector is located, and you can see it's pretty simple. Just simply press on that back side and it does remove quite easily. Okay, now we've got most of the passenger side disassembled. We're on to the driver's side. First thing I'm going to do is lay something soft, because we are working with some pretty soft plastics here. I'm going to lay a nice microfiber rag right here at the top of the steering column, and I'm going to actually adjust the steering wheel down and as far forward towards me as possible. So I'm going to pull it towards me with toward my chest, and I'm going to move it downward. All right, this gives you a little better look as how much room we have to play with here. So now we're actually going to be tackling this gauge cluster trim, and we're going to remove that. We're simply going to pry evenly from both sides, and it should come towards us here without a lot of drama. Okay, now that I've got this whole trim piece loose, I do want to point something out. For ND2 owners like myself, there is going to be an electrical connection on the backhand of this right side, okay? And we're going to have to grab the tab. The tab is going to be from the bottom. We're going to have to pinch up to release that electrical plug or connector. Again, that's on the right-hand side over here. And this is only for ND2 and newer owners. Okay, you can see I've got this cluster cover trim panel removed. The reason I've actually taken a second to remove it and give you a deeper look is this was a bit of a pain for me to get this temperature sensor unplugged. So if you notice on the bottom side here, that's that tab. That's where you're looking to press down. Again, it faces the floor when it's in the vehicle. You just don't have good access to get eyes on it. And in fact, in my case, I was being too gentle with the plug itself. I was trying not to put undue stress on the wires, and therefore I was really, really gently trying to pull back. I thought it would release and then easily pull back. But the whole time I actually had it released from the clip. I just didn't pull it out of the plug-in itself hard enough. So maybe this could save you the time from running into a similar issue. Again, it's really difficult to see. I did have to get out of the vehicle, looked through the windshield a couple times to just make sure I was going about that plug the right way. So just thought I'd take a quick moment to mention that in my process here. Here's the other side of the harness with the plug, and again, those are the tabs you're pushing up on and pulling back outward, but it's hard to really get a good firm grip and pull. And where you can see that little edge on the back, you can actually pull on that. So I was trying to be too gentle. Again, was worried about putting undue stress on the wiring there. But once you get that and you feel like it's released, just give her a little pull, grab on the sides, you won't be hurting anything. So now we can actually get the gauge cluster removed itself. It's going to be fastened in here with two of those Phillips head screws, one right there, one right there. We're going to loosen those up, and then we should be able to remove our gauge cluster. Okay, now that both screws have been removed, we're simply going to pry the cluster away from the dash, just like everything else. Just gently pull and pry the tabs out. There is one connector, of course, and then there's a little gray tab that's going to hold that connector in place. So we'll tackle that once we get the gauges loose from the dash. Okay, now that I've got the gauges pried from the dash, we're going to have access to our connector here. It's going to be right where my thumb is, and there's just a tab on the top. You're going to press down and you can pull that, remove it from the back side of the gauges, and then there's a little gray kind of clip or tab that's holding that wiring harness in place. We're just going to simply remove that as well. Okay, now I can remove the gauge cluster carefully. Be aware of that little prong as well. You want to be really sensitive. So just so you know, here is where that harness plugs into, and that little hole is where the gray clip keeps it in place. So that's the harness, and that's the gray clip. Mine was a little bit of a bugger. I used a plastic pry tool to get that loose. Hopefully yours isn't quite as hard, but this is the back side, and again, pretty easy. Again, you can't see it great, but if you do take a minute, get out of the car, look through the other side of the windshield, you'll be able to see right where these are. Hopefully that'll help you in removing your gauges. Now we'll actually go to a clean spot. I'll just let everything hang out in the vehicle here, and we're going to tackle the actual gauge face install here momentarily. Okay, now that we've got the gauges removed from the vehicle, you can see I've got a nice clean work area set up. And what I'm going to do next is start to remove the face of the gauge cluster. You can see there's these black tabs, and we're simply going to use our fingers here and pry against these black tabs to remove the front face of the gauge cluster from the back. So what we're basically prying off is the black section from the white. You can see they're all the way around the back side, and as you may have noticed, I've got my gloves on here. It's time to make sure we're limiting as much dust as possible. Again, the directions from revlimiter.net are very clear in trying to have as clean and dust-free of a workplace as possible. That way, when we start working on the gauges themselves, we keep them very clean. Not something that it sounds like is fun or easy to clean after the fact. So I'll start prying away and get this separated. Okay, I just pulled off the gauge face from the cluster. Now you can see I've got everything exposed here. You might notice that this could potentially fall off. If it does, just reinsert it. Be mindful of the way that it sits, but don't worry about that too much. So now we're going to remove the plastic gauge face. It might have even fallen out when you removed the cover. No worries, you can see how it just kind of easily lifts free from the cluster. We'll set that down and save that, put it in a box for later. Okay, now's the trickiest part of the install. We're going to have to remove, and in my case I'm going to disassemble both the tachometer needle and the speedometer needle. This is what revlimiter.net recommends as the safest way. There is a twist off and pry method. We're not going to do that though. We're going to try to really do this what I call the right way, and that's going to be to disassemble the needle. There is a very in-depth video of this from Adam at revlimiter.net. I'd be happy to point you in that direction if you want to check that out. But we're going to use the included pry tool, and we're going to simply pry off the two plastic edges from the needle. So we're going to support the needle and just simply pry one of these plastic edges off. We're going to have to do that one on both sides. And then at that point, we should be able to remove the center needle itself from an inlay that is what they call kind of a light tube. And then we're going to do as a final step, pry the light tube away from the center metal pin. And that's what we're trying not to pull out with the needle. That's why we can't just yank on this thing. Otherwise, we might be causing more damage than it's worth. Okay, you can see I've got one of the side covers off. That's what it looks like. This is how it looks on the, let's see if I can get a good look there. On the inside, so that little black tab inserts there, and that's what we basically pried off. So in my case, I held here and here and used the plastic pry tool to basically wedge underneath it, and I kind of did a twisting motion if I couldn't get enough force to just pry straight down. So that's what we want to do. Again, gentle and take your time with this process. This is not something we want to rush or force or use any sort of gorilla strength, otherwise you may break things. Okay, I've gotten both halves off, and honestly the needle came off very easily from the center. So you can see there's what 3 of our 4 pieces are so far. The last thing we're going to do is get this light tube out, and that's what's connected to the metal pin that we're not trying to remove. So I'm going to use the included needle, and I'm going to insert that very carefully through the center of my light tube that's currently bottomed out on the tube, and I'm going to push down, keep pressure on that center metal tube as I carefully pull upward on the light tube to remove that. Again, the goal here is that we're keeping that metal pin in place and removing this light tube without pulling on the metal pin too hard. Okay, I was able to get the light pipe or light tube removed, and I wanted to just make a quick note to slowly and gently turn this counterclockwise while you're holding that pin. See, there's the little metal pin that we were holding down with the included safety pin or needle that was included with the rev limiter kit. So again, gently and just a firm amount of pressure, we're holding that pin in place with the needle by pushing downward, and then we're prying and pulling upward, pulling it out this light pipe, and we're doing that while rotating counterclockwise. Now we're going to tackle the speedometer, which should be the same process. Again, take your time. This one can be a little trickier. So again, follow all the steps included in the instructions and be mindful not to use too much force. Okay, you can see I now have both of my needles disassembled, and the easy part is to simply take off the factory gauge sheet like this. We'll set that aside. Again, keep that in a nice safe place in case you ever decide you want to sell the vehicle, and you can always put that baby back in. So now we're going to take our rev limiter gauges and start the install process. So my car is an ND2, so I have the smaller triangle here for the shift indicator light. I am keeping that, by the way. I know a lot of folks may opt with the gauges that remove the shift nag. I don't blame you, but I'm keeping mine. I just think it's a cool feature to have, and it doesn't really bother me, even though my car does ask me to shift early all the time as well. So anyway, we're going to install the triangular shaped piece to help block any excess light from this section. So I've done that. I've inserted it after removing the gauge face. And next we're going to work on the tack ring. Just kidding, actually what we're first going to do before the tack ring, we're going to lay the new rev limiter gauges over top, and then we'll start working on the tack ring. But again, first before we tackle that, let's put on our needles again. It might be easier, we could do either step, but it might be easier to reassemble the needles first, then we don't have to deal with the tack ring in the way. So how we're going to do this is simply place them in the same order that we took them apart, of course, right? And just so you know, this tail goes that way. So we're going to snap this back into place. Then we're going to put the caps each on the side. We're going to use just a dab of super glue to keep those caps in place. And then we're going to reinsert our assembled needle at somewhere between 1 and 2,000 RPM, not 0, but a little above that, so about 1 and 2,000. And we're going to gently put that needle back on the small metal tube or rod that it sits on. We're going to very gently do that. The goal here is that we don't have to try so hard to pop these off if ever we decide we want to go back to the factory gauges. Just to give you a quick look, I'll show you. I put a little dab of super glue kind of in the corners by the base of this cap. So where that number 2 is on the one side, and then kind of the exact opposite on the other side of that center tab. That seemed to do it in holding together my tack needle. So I'm going to do the same thing here for the speedometer needle now. Okay, now that I've got my tack needle, the super glue is dried. I've put it on between 1 and 2. Again, anywhere but 0. And what we're going to do here is just gently push against that stepper motor until we get it to our satisfaction. And of course I want to get this zeroed out spot on. And we're going to just take our time with it here, just continually gently pushing against the stepper motor. Right now it's zeroed at about, I'd call that maybe 100 RPM, something like that. So again, I'm going to keep pushing back until I get that zeroed out and get it to my satisfaction. Okay, now that I've got it zeroed out, I think it's pretty drop dead center there at 0. I'm going to push on the needle a little bit harder just to get it in place, and we're done with the tack. Okay, you can see I've repeated the same process for the speedometer as well. You can always continue going counterclockwise if you do happen to mess up. I did actually go a little past 0 to the right hand side here, so I just rotated it counterclockwise all the way around and got it back to line up perfectly at 0. Okay, now it's finally time for that tack ring. And this is an ND2, so it goes on a very specific way. You can see this one has a cutout in it. It's not fully around the pin. The other side totally covers about, 75% of the pin. This one's much less. It's only about a quarter of the pin that's actually covered. It has to go on that way. That is intentional. So just be aware of that, mindful of that. This spacer basically just makes up for the room that we lost when we took out that big plastic piece from the original tack. Okay, now's a great time just to make sure there's no dust on the gauges that could have come on there during the install process. Now we're all set. We're simply going to reassemble the gauge cover. Don't forget the rubber skirt there as well. And once we get that reassembled, then we can go clean the glass on that thing and we'll get it back in the car. Now that the gauges are ready to go, we're going to reassemble everything. Make sure your glass is nice and clean. Clean the inside if you need to. This is a great opportunity to get that as clean as possible. Next, we're going to make sure that we get this rubber skirt lined up. You can see how I've got that oriented here. And now I'm going to reassemble the gauges. All right, now that I've got everything nice and cleaned up, we're going to get the car back together. We're just basically going to follow the inverse of all the steps that we took to disassemble the gauges here. Okay, everyone, I've got the gauges reassembled. Here's how they look. The lighting's okay, not super great in here, but you can still get an idea of the big, bold, yellow tack that I was looking for. Again, very Ferrari-esque in my opinion. The interior is put back together. So let's give this thing a shot and see how they look. You can see how the factory lighting, that white light, comes through very cleanly. We'll throw the roof, the target top or retractable fastback back in there. You can see everything is working as it should. And I'll go take this for a quick night drive, show you how they look at night. Alright, there you can see the gauges at night. This isn't all the way turned up, this is just kind of at the top of the night or headlights on. That's now with it fully bright, but you can see there's a nice glow right around the tack. Looks awesome. I'll probably keep it at this setting just for a little better interior lighting. Anyway, couldn't be happier. The install takes some time, but is well worth it if you get to this point, and there's certainly an element of satisfaction in knocking out this project. So shout out to revlimiter.net and Adam over there. It was great to work with them, and I hope this how-to video can be helpful for any other ND owner that may be considering these gauges. He makes them for all MX-5s out there, the NA, NB, NC, and also the ND. So if you are interested in something like this, don't hesitate to drop a like, comment below if you have questions. Happy to help, happy to to put you in touch with Adam if you want to consider a design of your own. I think these look great, definitely give me the Ferrari-esque vibe that I was going for in my Maserati, as my family likes to call it. Anyway guys, thanks again for watching. Please like, subscribe for more how-to videos, and God bless.